Hi again from the garden. So it is the very last day of August, which I thought was the perfect day to film this year's end of summer garden tour. Now, if you are new to my channel, I garden in Northwest Iowa in Zone 5A. And in this space, I grow cut flowers that I sell at area farmers markets, but then my husband and I also grow quite a few vegetables here. However, I think that is going to have to change for next year because this year I quickly realized that I need about double of the flowers because of the demand for my cut flowers this year, which is a great problem to have. So stay tuned for a lot of videos on the reformatting of my garden for next year. But anyway, let's get the garden tour started, and I want to start where we enter the garden, which is through my garden shed. So this part of the garden is probably the area that has taken on the biggest transformation this year. And if you've been watching my videos through the summer, you've seen that I've had quite a few projects for the garden, but this is definitely the big one. So this is kind of a lean-to that comes off the back of my photography studio building, which my garden is next door to downtown in my small town. And we completely redid this garden shed. We put the new siding on, the cedar shakes, and we rebuilt this wall because it was not in very good shape prior to starting to work on it this summer. And then we also added a door so that I could easily come in and out right into the garden. And then above me, my dad and I built this pergola, which has been a really great addition to the garden. It just cozies up this patio area because there was already a cement pad here. And so now there's a little patio and a cozy area right when you walk into the garden. So then right as you walk from the patio into the garden, the path leads right into where I have all of my dahlias planted. So off to the left, I have a long flower bed that is about 6 feet deep and 18 feet long, and that is full of dahlias. And then off to the right, I also have a little patch that has some dahlias in it. Now, my dahlias I planted really late this year because of this pergola build, because we were setting the posts in with concrete. So I probably planted them about a month and a half later than I really wanted to, but they're starting to bud up, and pretty soon they're all going to be covered with blooms. And the ones that are in the furthest corner of this flower bed, I've actually started harvesting quite a few off of, and they have all been beautiful so far. And next year I plan to plant them much earlier, of course, and I already have a lot more varieties that I want to grow. So moving from this area, I think we're just going to make a loop around the garden. So we'll start going up this first path, which is on the north end of the garden. So this is that first area that is right off of the patio under La Pergola. Right in front of me is where I have quite a few dahlia tubers planted, but then right past that is my Celosia patch. Now next year I think this entire space will also be dahlias, but this year it has worked really well for Celosia. So the varieties that I have planted in this space are the Ruby Parfait, which is towards the front, and then this entire area and the rest of the bed is a mix, which I think I have two. I have a Texas mix and a Pampas Plume mix. Those were both ordered from Floret. So there have been some really pretty varieties this year. My favorite, which is the really dark kind of burgundy one, and I only ended up with one plant of that. So hopefully I get more of that next year, but that is going to be really pretty for fall. Also in the very front of this bed, I had a few asters that I planted. Asters was something that I had never grown before, and so I just started a few seedlings just to see if they would grow well for me. They did, so I'm going to be growing 3 different varieties next year and probably a whole tray of them, and they will have their own spot in the garden. Okay, let's keep moving on down this path. Okay, so just past the Celosia patch, which is right behind me, is my Gumpfreena patch. And let me tell you, this plant is a workhorse. I think I need about half the plants of this next year, which is a good thing because then I'll have space for something else. But there are only 9 plants in this area, and they have completely taken over the space. Obviously, look how tall they have gotten. So the 3 varieties that I grew were the QIS Purple, There's the QIS orange and then the QIS white, which is a little shorter than the other varieties. But honestly, the white is my favorite. If you've seen me do my last few market bouquet arrangement videos, you'll see that I use the QIS white a lot. It's a little more branchy, which I found that I really like as the base of the bouquet for the filler. So I think I'm gonna grow the most of that next year, and then a few plants each of the other colors. And this is my first Gumpfreena patch. I have another Gumpfreena patch on the outside of my fence, which I'll show you that at the end of the video. I'm pretty sure that I only need that patch next year. So this space will become something else next year. Okay, let's move forward from the Gumpfreena patch to a few more dahlias. Okay, so I have moved right in front of my Gumpfreena patch, and you can see just how much the garden has really filled up this year. But to my right, I have two raised beds that are 44-inch square. I just got these from Home Depot at the end of the season last year. And last fall, I filled them with strawberry roots that I got from my uncle. And I learned my lesson. Something got in there over the winter and ate a lot of the roots, and so I ended up with only about 7 strawberry plants, and there were probably 60 in there. So I ended up starting some dahlias from seed. These are all of the free seeds that came with my dahlia book from Floret. And so these have been really fun to see how they flower, because if you're not familiar with growing dahlias, if you grow them from tuber, you know exactly what you're gonna get. If you grow them from seed, it is a total surprise. So I don't know if you can see this really pretty red one. This one just opened yesterday, and I think it is beautiful. A lot of the varieties are singles, which I probably won't keep, but this one is a double, and I think it's gorgeous. And so I think I may actually save the tubers from this one. But this fall, I will replant these raised beds again with my strawberry roots, because that's what I want this space to be. And then my dahlias will of course live in their designated spots. But for this year, it was great to be able to fill this space. Now off to my right, you're gonna start seeing the greenhouse. Surrounding the greenhouse on 3 sides this year were my snapdragons. I planted 144 plants. It was about perfect for this year. Next year, I think I'm going to end up planting more. It was a good amount for my first year. I did a variety, and my favorite varieties that I found were the Costa series and the Potomac series, because they grew much taller and their stems were a lot stronger and the blooms seemed to last longer. I planted a few Madame Butterfly varieties, and while they were beautiful, I just felt that they didn't hold up quite as much. So I of course have a lot of my snapdragon seeds already ordered for next year, so stay tuned for those varieties, but I'll be planting the snapdragons around the greenhouse in the same spot next year. So then moving forward, I have one more bed on this side of cut flowers, and that is kind of a miscellaneous bed. There are some varieties that I just started a few of because I wanted to try them out and see if I liked them, and so that is where all of those ended up. I started the Sahara Rebecchia, I started a lime marigold, I did some pincushion flowers, and I did a variety of straw flowers. And I have some status in there. So next year, I decided I am definitely growing the marigolds again. And the marigolds that I grow are not the short kind of marigolds that you're probably thinking of that you just get at the garden center. These are tall marigolds. In fact, let me show you, because they're blooming right now. So this is the variety of marigold that I'm talking about. The blooms are a really good size, and these are probably 30 inches tall, and so these make a really great cut flower. So I will be growing these next year. I also will definitely be growing my Sahara Rebecchia next year. I love this plant. All the blooms seem to be kind of a variety, which I think is really fun. And they've been blooming throughout the entire season, so that is on my yes list. I also will be growing status because it is an amazing filler. This year I just grew the white. Next year I'm gonna grow a mix, so I have all different colors. And then as far as the straw flowers and the pincushion flowers, they are not making the cut for next year. While I really like them, they just were not as productive and what I really wanted to fill my bouquets with, so those are getting nixed. All right, so we're at the midway point of this side of the path. I'm gonna flip the camera around and show you where my sunflowers are growing, and then I'll show you the middle section where all of our vegetables are. And then we'll finish up looping back around with the rest of the cut flowers. Okay, so we're facing west now in the garden, and this is the other half of the garden. Now you'll notice this trellis above me. I have a couple of these located on my pathways, and I use this to grow vine crops this year to utilize my space. So this melon plant, which clearly has seen better days, we're getting to the end of the season, and so it definitely has taken on some powdery mildew, so I think I'm gonna have to rip it out this weekend. But this was I think it's called a Sweetness 123. It's a seed that I got from Baker Creek, and it gives these cute little yellow and orange melons. They have a white center and they're really tasty. I harvested probably about 40 this last weekend, and I can see there's a few more in here. So this was a really good addition to the garden this year. On this side are my little cucamelons, which got off to a slow start, but they're starting to vine over the trellis, and I think I will grow these again next year because those are tasty as well. Then in this long bed behind me, this was my sunflower bed this year. So let me move the camera forward and then I'll show you what I have going so far for fall planting. Okay, so a lot of this area is just starting to perk up for the fall, but you can see in front of me I have some nice tall sunflowers that will probably start opening this week to be harvested, which is perfect timing for my farmer's market at the end of the week. But the rest of the bed is full of another succession planting of both sunflowers and zinnias. I have a huge market that I am doing the end of September that I'm hoping that times out right to give me a whole bunch of blooms for that. But this bed itself was where I planted all of my sunflowers for July and August, and it worked perfect. So this will be where I'm doing sunflowers again next year. And I should mention this bed itself is 6 foot deep and about 24 foot long. Okay, so I am in the middle of the vegetable area of the garden, which is a really fun spot and totally overgrown. So behind me you can see I have a mass of tomato plants. These have been growing like crazy all summer long. I started pruning them and then completely lost track of them, but they have really been producing the tomatoes. In here we have all of our canning tomatoes. This year we did Roma and an Amish paste. I definitely like the Amish paste. The size of them is perfect for making sauce, so I think I'll do more of those next year. So far we've made tomato sauce and salsa, and the plants are still full of tomatoes, so I think we'll get around to pizza sauce out of them too. Along with the canning tomatoes in this space, I have a Brad's Atomic Grape and I have a Sunrise Bumblebee, which are two really fun plants that are smaller tomatoes, and they're both really tasty. And then behind the tomato plants, earlier this year was our patch of sweet corn. That of course is done by now, but we got a lot of great sweet corn out of that area, and we grow the Ambrosia variety, which is a two-colored, really sweet variety, and that grew great this year. I have a feeling the sweet corn might get nixed from this spot next year though, just because I need more cut flower planting areas. So the trellis that you see over top of me, this is the Titan squash tunnel that comes from Gardener's Supply, and that's what I'm using it to grow, is squash. So behind me, you can see that I have some butternut squash vining up, and then on this side, I have some spaghetti squash vining up. And then right in the middle, which you probably can't even see, I'll put a close-up on the screen, there's a zucchini plant in here. I'm actually surprised how much zucchini we've gotten off of it because it gets quite a bit of shade, but we have gotten a lot of zucchini off of that plant so far. In front of me we have a few more tomatoes, and then the spot that is in between this vegetable area and the greenhouse is where all of my potatoes were planted. Half of those have been dug up, half are still in the ground, and the spot where I dug the potatoes up so far, I actually did a video on it. I planted more sunflowers. I have probably 70 sunflowers in this little spot, and these I also am hoping are ready for that big market this next month. All right, I'm gonna make my way through this squash tunnel, and then we'll go down the other path of the garden that has a few more vegetables, but mostly the rest of my cut flowers. So this is the south pathway of the garden, and we are facing back east. Off to my right is the area that I just showed you with all of the tomatoes, and then you'll see off to the left is my zinnia patch. So my zinnias have grown in this spot the last couple years, and this area is actually part sun and part shade, and they have grown really well. However, they got a little late start this year, and they're really just now starting to produce. And so my plan next year is to fill this area with more shade to part shade, perennials and annuals that I can use for cut flowers. And then my zinnias are going to move into the middle part of the garden where they get full sun all day long. This year I also planted a variety of types of zinnias to test out to see what I like best. I knew that I was going to like the Bennery's Giant series the best. And I do. That is virtually probably all I'm going to plant next year. You can see this Bennery's Giant right in front of me. The blooms are huge, and the colors of these is so vibrant. Now, the other kinds that I really like, which I don't see any in bloom right now, are the Queen Lime series. There's the Queen Lime Blush, Red, and Orange, and I will be growing all of those next year as well, because those have amazing colorings on them that kind of fade, like an ombre, and I really love the look of that into bouquets. And so next year, that's the plan: Bennery's Giants and Queen Lime. Okay, let's keep moving down the path. Okay, so I'm standing underneath the second trellis that goes over the pathway in my garden. On my right side, I have an English cucumber plant, which has produced some great cucumbers this year. That will be a good variety to grow next year. And then I tried noodle beans. I don't know. I think they're cool looking, but honestly, I think I would rather plant maybe some pickling cucumbers on this trellis. But they were fun to try for a year. I think I would maybe grow them again if I had an abundance of space. But since I found out that I need so much more space for my cut flowers, and my husband likes to make pickles so much, I think that I will do some pickling cucumbers on here instead and scratch the noodle beans for next year. Now, at the base of the trellis around the edge of the vegetable garden, I did plug in some bush beans. I did just a green variety and then the red swan variety, and those were fantastic. So I'll definitely plant those again next year. And then behind me, you can see the start of my greenhouse again. You can see the snapdragons that are in bloom. I'm starting to get another flush of those for fall, which will be fantastic because snapdragons have been blooming all year long for me, and I hope they go right up until frost. All right, so this part of the garden is probably, to be totally honest, the most disastrous right now. I thought about pulling all the weeds before I filmed this, but to be quite honest, we all have weeds in our garden, so I decided to leave them. This space definitely needs a complete reworking before next year, and so that's going to be one of my projects this fall when I rip everything out of the garden. It has a couple of really great yarrow plants in it. Those I will be keeping for next year, and in fact, I'm going to fill this area with a bunch more yarrow because I have found that I really like that for a filler for my cut flower bouquets. I had a patch of Orlea in here that I wanted to try. And while it is really pretty, I decided I don't think I'm going to grow it next year. It just didn't hold up as well as my other fillers, and so I'm going to use this space for something else. I also tested out some dark opal basil in this spot. That was fantastic. So next year I'm going to be growing some different basil varieties for filler. I also have some hydrangeas in this spot that will just keep getting bigger and bigger over the years, and those are going to be gorgeous. I have some delphiniums in this spot, which I love the look of delphiniums in the spring for that cottage garden look, but I don't want to use them in my bouquets, and so I'm probably going to end up pulling those as well. And then the last thing that I planted in this area this year, which I am expanding next year, is my Lisianthus. Lisianthus are beautiful. Yes, they are super hard to grow, but I fell in love with them, and they grew amazing in this spot. This is shaded in the morning and the afternoon, but it gets a little midday sun, which I think was perfect for them. I also realized that I can plant them much closer together, and so I'm going to be utilizing this whole strip in front of my hydrangeas all the way up to here, which is probably about 25 feet. And I think I can get 3 rows of Lisianthus across and 25 feet long. So that is the plan for next year for this spot, along with more yarrow and whatever else I decide to plug into this area. All right, Let's head down to the end of the path and I'll show you one more little patch in the garden. All right, so at the very end of this path, before we circle back around into the front of the greenhouse, I have one more little area of Celosia. This is the Selway White Celosia. And this variety was a winner for me, so I'll be planting again next year. And right behind me is my raspberry patch, which is completely getting out of hand, and my branches are loaded with raspberries right now, and wasps apparently. I think I will move on and show you in front of the greenhouse. Okay, so I'm back in front of the greenhouse and I just wanted to go over how this area has changed throughout the growing season as well. I started off with this area planted of calendula and nasturtium at the beginning of the year, just because I had planted all of my cut flower seedlings already and I wanted to fill this space. Well, I know now that I definitely need to utilize this space for cut flowers, and so I ended up ripping those out a few weeks ago and I had started some zinnia seedlings inside, and so this area is now planted with those zinnia seedlings, which I should be able to get some blooms in a few weeks, just in time for that large market that I keep mentioning. Now also you'll see behind me some dahlias. These are some more seed dahlias that I just filled in some planters with. I probably won't do this again next year because they're blocking the entrance to the greenhouse, but it was fun for this year. All right, so the last area that I want to tell you about is actually on the outside of this fenced-in garden. It's an area that I started last fall and I wanted to make it into a cottage garden area. I also use it for photo shoots, but it is mostly perennials. This year though, I did put in a few annuals out there that I've been using for my cut flower bouquets, and I think next year I'm going to be utilizing it a lot more for annuals. Okay, so here's the area on the outside of the fence. It's a little curvy, but I would say it's anywhere from 8 to 15 feet deep in parts, and it is 30 feet wide. So it is a great space. I have a lot of perennials planted in this area, such as echinacea, monarda, salvia, which are all great for pollinators. I also have a lot of Shasta daisies planted here, which were great for bouquets in the spring. I have some perennial scabiosa in the front here, which the stems on those is not long enough, but they're very pretty for the area. Here's the Gumpfreena Patch that I mentioned earlier. I think I'll do the same exact thing next year because it's a great space for this, and obviously it's growing really good. And then here are my Cosmos. These have been amazing lately for my bouquets. I think this is the afternoon white variety, which I'll be planting again next year. And then I also want to plant some Rubenza Cosmos. And I think I will just plant these the entire length of the fence because they fill in so well and get so tall. Back in the corner of this bed, I have a few black-eyed Susan plants, which I haven't been cutting off of, but I think out here would be a great spot to plug in some of that Rebecchia that I want to grow as annuals for cut flowers next year. I also think that space would be a really great place to try some amaranth next year, so that is on my list. And then I might end up moving that Titan squash tunnel out to that area and growing my squash out there next year. We'll see. And I almost forgot, let me show you my pumpkins. So this pumpkin patch is a raised no-dig bed that my husband and I put in this spring. I laid cardboard down first, filled it with soil after we put railroad ties to frame it out. This has been a great spot for pumpkins this year. They're definitely starting to die off with the end of the season, but I think I'm going to have a pretty good harvest to use for decorating. All right, so that is it for this end of the season garden tour. I hope you enjoyed seeing how everything has been changing throughout the year. Stay tuned for a lot more videos on, of course, harvesting cut flowers, going to farmers markets, but then I'm going to also start sharing my plan for next year, what I'm growing for next year, and how I'm going to start getting the garden ready for winter. So stay tuned. We'll see you soon.